So a couple of weeks ago, I was sick for the first time, or the second time in like less than 6 weeks. And the first time I was sick, I tried to be productive and do like reading and writing, and then I just really felt stupid and decided that was a terrible idea. And so this second time I was sick, for some reason, maybe part of me knew we were kind of inching up on this retreat, but I somehow just got on the ancestry.com app, which is something I've never done. And I have my Mormon friends to thank, I guess, for their contribution to the universe. And so I'm lying on my couch with this little app, and for the next 2 days, it just completely consumed me because like a video game almost. My partner would say, "Are you playing? Are you doing that thing again?" And I said, "Well, it's interesting, like because what I learned, it's very complicated where we come from, and my own family tree is a little bit." Like most of the branches have been sawed off and used to make other things or burned somewhere or something. Like it's a very unclear picture, at least in anything I've been holding until now. But very quickly, because of census records and birth records and death records and all this knitting that all these unknown strangers in the universe have done, I could start to see like, oh, all the way back to like the 15 and 1600s, where certain people came to this country for the first time and where they came from. And I could even start to see like who seemed to go against the wishes of their family and marry someone from another town, or who was shoved into a marriage, or who lost children, or like, and it just felt like this whole picture started to unfold of hundreds of people that somehow were linked to my being here, that I had no conscious idea of who they were. And one of the things that was very interesting and made it almost like a video game was seeing how, like, when I'd see someone who fought in the Revolutionary War, I'd think, yay, points. And then I'd see someone whose picture someone had put slave owner, and their descendants had fought in the on the Confederate side of the Civil War. And then I could see, well, that person's son became a Baptist minister, but his father was a writer. And it was almost like this interesting part of my mind almost wanted to start keeping score, like good things to be part of, not good things to be part of. And, you know, who do I want to be associated with? Oh, there's a lady and a sir, you know, a knight on this side. But, oh, there's a someone who seemed to be, you know, a robber or a homeless person or something on this side. And it like, so this went on. And what I started to notice, what it's almost like the idea of ancestors, or the reality of ancestors, is this kind of, it sheds light in us on what's possible or impossible. Like when you meet someone that you somehow relate to as a young person or an old person, and you think, oh, that person was able to do X, or that person made it impossible to do X. And so it's almost like they become these faces of the universe that we get to see. Oh, what do I think about that in relationship to my own being, or my own sense of belonging or alienation, or in a way, something to like try on or even rebel against. Like my brother, I'm pretty sure, has lived his entire life trying not to be my father. And you get these wild swings back and forth, you know. I remember reading an article not so long ago that was saying the United States are sort of the bratty teenager of Europe, that we haven't quite yet faced as many of our own difficulties. And that there's this sense of inheritance that we receive from some of these cultures, but there's also this sense of wanting to shirk things off and see what else might be there. And I think how we come into these different lineages, in one way, it's this incredible mystery, and in another way, it's we seem to find them through marriage or through profession or through artistic or philosophical inclination. And sometimes it seems like they seem to find us, despite our best attempts to remain, free agents. And like I remember sitting with a friend of mine once, and she got all sort of teared up just about the idea, the lineage of women artists. And you could tell like she's trying to claim something inside herself, and she felt this just profound gratitude for all these women who had somehow dared to have their creative voice. And you could see how she's flirting with having her own creative voice. And in a way, I think, the whole koan lineage, the whole way we're here is this lineage knit together of these moments of awakening that someone sort of realized, oh, this would be helpful to hand down. Somehow you don't even have to be there to step inside of it. And I don't know, this relationship of ancestor, the literal sort of word of it is what's come before, our relationship to what's come before. And I guess part of what I was noticing is how much we don't know most of the time. And yet we kind of have this sense, and it comes through us. And the land I'm living on, I notice how much I'm starting to get so curious. Like, well, who else has lived here in the length of time? And who recognized there's this very large, mysterious white, pure white stone out in the field. I always think, like, who decided to leave it there? And what did they think of it? And what was their relationship to these trees that have sometimes, some of them are very old, that have been here, and what have they seen? And I think place is definitely where ancestors can live, but there's also this strange way that, like, I remember getting my astrological chart done once, and the guy started looking and he said, oh, your moon's in the second house, and that means you have this particular issue. And he said, I think that comes down to you from your mom. And I thought, well, how the hell do you know that? And sure enough, I did her chart, and she has the exact same placement of the moon in that second house. And I just think, how does that work? Like, how does that part of what gets handed on? I've heard John say things get handed on in the dark. It's like, what finds us and what sticks to us? And it seems like there's always this challenge in ancestral territory, whether it's blood ancestors or lineage ancestors or anything, of like, what somehow belongs to me to continue to transform, and what are the things that I have to almost like, unshackle myself from and not let them suck me back into the I don't know, kind of the tangle of like the sutra we sing, all of the ancient twisted karma, timeless greed, hatred, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and soul, I confess openly and let it go. And it's like part of our task, I think, is to see, well, what's for us? And where are the places we might try to take on things that don't belong to us? And one more thing to say before we want to hear from you and see who you brought with you today. I also was speaking of things that find us, that Anderson Cooper podcast with Laurie Anderson also found me this week through someone, and you can tell part of what he's up to is he's trying to figure out like what rituals are appropriate to understand how to let someone go and understand who they've been. And one of the things she says to him is she's very interested in, like John was saying, objects, the way objects hold people and memories, and that at a certain point that fades. And she's interested in that mystery, like what allows something to keep its sort of numinous resonance, and then what's the moment at which it flies off. And she talks about letting things just fly off and become new things. And one of the things he's telling her about that he was most surprised about his mother, who was Gloria Vanderbilt, was she had stacks and stacks and stacks of old bills. And he said, she was loose with money when she had it, and she was loose with money when she didn't have it. And so she just had all these stacks of unpaid bills. And an idea that he had, because he was kind of disturbed and delighted, was he said, I want to make a room and use those as wallpaper, have all the old bills wallpaper. And Laurie Anderson says, that's an amazing, that's such a great idea. And she's interested in how things take on new life when they've left us, or even when we still have them. And she talks about how Lou Reed, who was her partner, after she had walked him to the edge of the world and then let him go wherever he was headed next, that he had all these leather jackets. And so she started giving them away to people. And then she'd see them walking around town. And she would have this sort of mixed feeling of like, hey, is that Lou, or is that sort of wherever this jacket's life is next? And I don't know, there's something about what we keep with us in our lives. Like whether it's connected to an ancestor or not, it's connected to something, it's connected to someone, whether it's art or sculpture or picture, or it's like, what's the who are we keeping company with every day and night, whether we're aware of it or not. And Anderson Cooper also talks to the poet Elizabeth Alexander, who lost her husband pretty early in her husband's life and still had little boys. And one of the things she talks about is, as did Laurie Anderson actually, that you don't actually know what grief is going to be for you. That it might come with a wave of freedom, or it might come with a wave of relief, or it might come with delight, or it might come with a hole that seems like it can't be filled. But one of the things Elizabeth Alexander says is, unexpectedly to her, she just started writing furiously. And what came out was this kind of, a kind of plunging into what her husband was, who he was, and what her experience of being with him was. And it just flew out of her. And it carried her in a way through her grief, and it's come to carry her and then carry many other people. One last thing I'll tell you while we're waiting. Laurie Anderson says this one other thing, which is she's collaborating with a university to make an AI program that you can dump, like they dumped all of Lou Reed's poetry and songs and all these things, and you can have kind of an encounter with him. And she says this interesting thing, which is, wouldn't it be interesting to take all of your own works and emails and thoughts, and like in some way you become an ancestor to yourself, that you can collaborate with yourself or ask yourself what you really think about something based on all the yous that have been. And some way, I think ancestors are a little like that. They hold parts of us that we forget about. It's always so, we do this every year, but it's always so surprisingly touching, just the little bits that make us, that we get to witness, or that wash over us, or hold us, or hurt us, or just all the, and I really like so many things that have been said, but I really like what you said, Dan, about when you look back, you don't know. Sometimes you think you know what someone meant, and then it becomes keeping a few people said this, keeping company with ancestors becomes like a koan, where you think you know who they were or who they were to you or what their life was about or even what they might have said to you, and then you might be surprised as you continue to sit with it. And the one last thing I wanted to say, and we'll see if you have anything last to say, John, is that thing Eleanor said about the images that somehow stay with us that we don't even realize were embedded in us. And someone told me this story recently about a dream she had that had this beautiful road on it, dirt road with kind of beautiful scenery, and we were in the dream. It held this sense of possibility for her, and it felt very important, but for a while we just thought, what is this? What is this image? What is it? And the longer we kept talking about it, she said, well, it reminds me of her father was a Ukrainian soldier in World War II, which basically meant that he had to take a German uniform to fight the Russians, even though he didn't agree with the Germans either. And he was a prisoner of war for many, many, many months. And it was very hard. And at some point, the war was over and he got tossed out onto this long, beautiful road that appeared in her dream, very similar. And as he was walking on this road, all of a sudden he comes upon a loaf of bread just sitting in the middle of the country with no one around, this loaf of bread. And he immediately thinks it's a trap. You know, somebody's either poisoned this or they're going to ambush me or it's but he, you know, he's really hungry. He's been a prisoner of war. And so he can't leave the bread. And so he just stares at it. And he finally decides, you know, fuck it. Even if they come after me, I'm hungry enough. Like, I just want the bread. And sure enough, there's no traps. The bread, it somehow, who knows how it got there. It was a gift from the universe. But he can't bear to eat it because he's just so happy to have found it. So he just carries it against his chest and he keeps walking down the road. And he finally reaches a bridge where the Russians are on one side and the Americans are on the other side, and he's wearing a German uniform. And he thinks, this can't be good, you know? I'm not like, will I get shot from the front or the back? What's gonna happen? But he, like the bread, he just decides, well, you know, I've made it this far, I'm just gonna see what happens. And somehow he's clutching this loaf of bread and he walks across the bridge, and somehow the Russians leave him alone, and somehow the Americans let him come into their camp, and he doesn't speak a word of English. And they try to tell him something, and the most he can get is, you know, sit down. So he says, okay. And he still has no idea what to do, but he just finally starts eating his bread. And is so happy. And there's this sense of his life began again at that moment, in a sense. And what was sort of magical was how this road appeared in his daughter's dream, you know, 70 years later or something. And it's at some pivot point for her that feels like new life, but high stakes is being born. And so these images that just keep washing back over us feels like the territory when you hold up all your objects, that they bring something to you again and again and again, and you don't know what. So yeah, thanks for sharing them. And John, you have anything you want to say?